We're continuing our series this morning, These Things I Bring, about, maybe just, is it all right if we put it in front of us visually? Sorry, Amy.
I don't know, look at Todd, look at Brian.
We're doing this series, we started 2 weeks ago, and Linda helped me introduce it 2 weeks ago because it was her idea. And the series is called These Things I Bring, and it's about how to become people of authentic relationship. And so I'm excited that we get to continue that this morning with you. And so, thank you, sweetheart. Doing okay?
Yeah.
Need anything?
No.
All right, good.
I think I'm good.
So this morning we're going to talk about vulnerability and how vulnerability contributes to the possibility of authentic relationship for us. And, there are different definitions of what it means to be vulnerable. If you're talking about countries and military, to be vulnerable is to be, in danger of attack or weakness where you can be attacked. In business, vulnerability might be that you have opened your business somehow to some liabilities that you didn't really want to have, and you might say, my business is vulnerable. But when it comes to relationship, the common definition of vulnerable is actually pretty striking. So I kind of want to put it out there right up front rather than easing into it. Are you ready? Okay. So the common definition of vulnerable is to be capable of being physically or emotionally wounded. I know everybody goes, well, I'm glad I came to church today.
Yeah, sign me up.
All right, sign me up. It's pretty striking. Now, we're not advocating, as we have this conversation this morning, I want to give you a little disclaimer. We are not advocating for anyone to put themselves in a place where they're being harmed in an abusive relationship. So when we talk about, being vulnerable and the possibility of being wounded, we're not saying like, hey, you should, let your relationships where you're harmed physically or emotionally, because there's all kinds of abuse. What we're talking about this morning is relationships where you might want that relationship to go to the next level. We don't often talk about that a lot, as human beings. Like, as we're getting to know people, we usually don't say to people, like people we're becoming friends with, like, hey, I'd really like our friendship to go to the next level. Just that is vulnerable if you were to say it, right? But we know it. We just kind of know it in an unspoken way inside ourselves. Whether it's a friendship or with a sibling or your spouse or partner or whoever it might be. And to do that, for relationships to kind of go to the next level, we have to let our guard down at least a little. And letting our guard down a little bit creates the possibility that we will be wounded. And that's where that definition of vulnerable comes from. And there's a lot to talk about here, but the basic idea of the relationship between being vulnerable and authentic relationship is that when we let our guard down, when we open ourselves up a little more, we're inviting the other person to kind of do the same thing. At least if we're the one who is being, what's the word I want, proactive in that way, where we say, well, hey, I'm going to open myself up a little bit with this person, and we're kind of sending the signal like, hey, that's the kind of relationship that I want, and it would be okay if you opened yourself up a little bit too. And if it's a healthy opening up, and we'll get to that, because there's a healthy opening up, and sometimes there's an unhealthy opening up, right? So, but if it's a healthy opening up, it can be the sending of a signal to someone else that, hey, it's safe to be open with me. That's part of that sort of unspoken signaling that goes on between us as human beings. Like we say, we show a little openness, and the other person feels like, oh, this seems like one of those relationships that can be safe to kind of be who you are, be who you really are, maybe, show a little bit more of who you really are to this other person. And then I was thinking, if offering vulnerability is a key to somehow really connecting with each other as human beings and maybe finding our way to those deeper, more authentic relationships that we long for, I was thinking like, so, especially in a world where there is so much distance between people, so much relational fear, so much brokenness in all of us, I was thinking, if vulnerability is a key to this, as I think it is, I mean, you can nuance that 1,000 ways, but if there is no vulnerability, if we all just walk around with shields raised, to use a Star Trek analogy, any Trekkies? There you go. If we just walk around with shields raised, relationships will never be close. But if it is any kind of a key, then in the kind of world and the struggle we have, as God has moved toward us in Christ, has He done this? And so I wanted to ask you, do you see, when you think about what we understand of Jesus and how we see Jesus in the Gospels, and do you see a vulnerability? Do you see any place where we're talking about how God has moved toward us in Christ?
Absolutely. Is this on? Okay, sounds quiet. Well, I would say,
talk loud.
first and foremost, the incarnation, when He came. I mean, how much more vulnerable can you be than coming literally from heaven and being a humble, there we are, being a humble person like the rest of us. In fact, we're singing that song in a little while. You didn't want heaven without us, so Jesus, you brought heaven down. And that's exactly what He did.
I know, I didn't think about it the first few years I was a Christian, maybe for quite a long time. But somehow over time, each Christmas would roll around, and this crazy mystery, started to dawn on me. Like, you look into, because we all get kind of conditioned. If you grew up in church especially, right? You get conditioned, oh yeah, Jesus born at Christmas. Oh yeah, He's crucified, He rose from the dead, Easter, yay. We kind of know the story. But what started to happen to me is I started to look into that manger wherever it was, a display at a church or in our church or whatever, and I began to think, what is this that God comes into the, if I was God, because I'm not as wise as God, I'd show up in the world like He-Man, and hey, people need to get your act together, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how it's going to work. And God comes into the world as a child. Talk about vulnerable. I mean, I sometimes, when I see people with their little infants, I'm almost scared for them because an infant is so vulnerable, Or there's these other places, I think of Jesus washing the disciples' feet when I think about vulnerability. Think about Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And I don't know if you've ever connected the dots, because you have to connect the dots in two Gospels together to see this. But when you connect the dots in two Gospels together, they're sitting around the Passover table, right? This is the night Jesus is betrayed. This is the Passover. And they're arguing about which of them will be the greatest when the kingdom comes. That's what's happening. And Jesus gets up from the table, and He goes and He ties on an apron, and He fills a basin with water, and He comes over and He starts washing their feet. That's pretty vulnerable. I mean, that's picture, guys, if you were with a bunch of guys or your guy friends and everybody was jockeying for kind of, the manliness of the conversation. And I don't know, and you just walked over to one of them and hugged them. They'd be like, dude, we're all in man mode, right? And so Jesus is vulnerable. Or I think about that same, these things are kind of all that same night, which is interesting, and they're all in John's gospel, which tells me John must have had an eye for this stuff, that he was tuned into this. So in John's gospel, when Jesus is telling them, he's basically trying to brace them for the fact that He's leaving. And He says, you know the way to the place that I'm going. And you remember this story where Philip says, we don't know where you're going, so how could we possibly know the way? And there's frustration. It's not a religious conversation, it's a frustrated conversation. And Jesus' response, I didn't hear it this way until a couple of years ago, but I hear the vulnerability now. Jesus looks at him and He says, Philip, have I been with you so long that you still don't know? Philip says, just show us the Father. Jesus is like, have I been with you so long that you still don't know? And there's a vulnerable, Jesus isn't just saying, hey man, hey dude, you should get this by now. Jesus is more like, there's kind of a heartbrokenness to it. Like we spent the last 3 years together, right? Sitting around the fire at night talking, traveling from town to town, talking about people's brokenness, healing people. You've listened to the word of the kingdom that I've been sharing, and this possibility of a new life, and you've seen that this is the thing that changes everything, but you still, man, Phil, it's like he's inviting him into conversation, and so the conversation is vulnerable, and then I think that same what we call the upper room discourse. I love the names we give to things. It's Jesus just talking to the disciples around the table. He says, "I no longer call you servants." Anybody know the rest? I call you friends. Because the servant doesn't know his master's business. But he basically says, "But I have opened to you everything the Father has shown me." I didn't keep any secrets. I didn't keep myself up here and you guys here. I've opened it up to you, right through my very being, right through my very heart. So there is this vulnerability with Jesus that comes through, and of course the ultimate vulnerability of Jesus, of God in Christ, is the cross, which I'm going to bring into this conversation more next week. But suffice it to say that what we see in Christ is not that there's a bit of vulnerability, but that God comes down here and he walks among us human beings in a lot of intentional vulnerability. And I think we need to see that. And I think we need to come to terms with that. But it doesn't come easy for us. I've said that relationships are often like two kids at the edge of a swimming pool, and they're saying to each other, "You go first." "No, you go." "No, you go." It's like two people building a friendship, or two people trying to get closer. Everybody's kind of afraid of the first step of openness. Nobody wants to kind of jump in the pool first. And so why do you think vulnerability is hard for us?
Gosh.
Why is openness vulnerable? Why is that hard for us?
Who wants to put themselves out there and be the weak one or the needy one? You can say things that you might want to take back if you're not safe in the relationship or secure in the relationship.
Yeah.
You might think, "Oh boy, now they have some dirt on me."
Right. And in the end, isn't that all kind of a fear of being hurt?
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, we maybe don't want to say that out loud, especially probably guys don't want to say that out loud. And yet, here's the thing. I watch guys get hurt in their guy relationships. Like, guys don't want to say, like, this is a question, sort of my closeness to other men or how much I can trust my guy friends. And yet, it still happens. And somewhere inside, even if we aren't putting words to it, and most guys are absolutely not putting words to it, women more readily do that.
I think you see that from childhood. I always said, like, girls are the worst, because they just really hurt each other, and boys kind of like punch each other and then it's over with, But
yeah, if you hurt me, I'll just beat you up.
Yeah.
Right? I won't cry about it.
Right.
I'll retaliate.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's some of that difference.
But they let it go, too. A lot of times they can let it go. They don't know necessarily, and I suppose this is being a generalization, how to work it through. Girls are like talkers, generally.
There is that, but then there are always exceptions. And I think both the men and the women here would agree with that. There are always exceptions. Like, sometimes we say women are the talkers, but then there are some couples that where you go, "Oh, the guy is the I mean, I'm a talker,
No.
But I also can think of guys in relationships where the guys, instead of addressing their hurt, have taken their ball and gone home. Yes. Not punched back, maybe initially there was a punch or some words of anger, but in the end, their hurt tempted them to walk away from what could have continued to be a great relationship. So here's a question for you. Can you think of in your life or our lives, in your life, can you think of a relationship where you took those Notice I'm asking her to tell the personal stories, right? That was a joke. I don't want to be vulnerable. Can you tell me a story or think of a story where you took those little steps of openness with someone because you wanted that relationship to be something, you wanted it to go to a new place or be something more than it was? And you
Yeah.
proactively said, I'm going to...
I think I can think of probably a lot of examples in my head about friendships, people who are very close to me now, but I think some of that, as it happens over a long period of time, it's very organic.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily something you pursue hard. It happens step by step by spending time with people.
Yeah, I think as we grow in these things, the best way is for it to happen organically because we just kind of know how to flow in the right degree of openness and how to build relationships,
But one example I can think of that you guys might think is strange, but when I think of this, I think of vulnerability as a risk. And I remember with both of our kids, when they were like in high school, thinking either I had to talk to them about something serious or I just wanted more of a relationship with them. And, that didn't come naturally to me because I didn't have that with my own mother. And, she was a wonderful woman, and I never for one moment doubted her love for me, but she didn't know how to be vulnerable. And there were simple things she wouldn't tell us, like, well, who'd you go to prom with, Mom? And she'd say, oh, that was a long time ago, that doesn't matter. It's like, really? Show me who you are.
Yeah.
I wanted to know who...
Not a lot of self-revealing.
Yeah, I wanted to know who she was, and that was hard for her for some reason. So with our kids, I remember thinking, before we even had children, sorry, I just hit you, that I wanted to have a different kind of relationship. I wanted it to be like, not necessarily like friends, best buddies, but something in the relationship that was deeper and closer, not just I'm the mom and you're the child and I'm going to tell you what to do.
There's a place between the parent up here, it's all authority and it's distant. There's a place between that and I'm just your pal that's a beautiful place.
So I remember a couple instances, which I will not share details, where I thought, okay, I need to have this conversation with Luke or with Joanna. And in both cases, I took them for a ride in the car. And bought them a Starbucks or something.
They can't get away. If
No.
Yeah, if you have them in the car, they can't get away.
No, they can't get away, but that wasn't what I was thinking. I was thinking, when you're in the car, you're not looking at each other. You're not staring at that person and making them feel nervous. So you're looking forward. But what I realized was you cannot demand vulnerability. You have to be vulnerable first. And so in these situations, I knew I had to open my heart to my kids and tell them some of the stuff that I had done, stupid stuff, when I was younger, and bad decisions I made, and I didn't want to. I remember crying when I was doing it. And in both of those cases, it softened their heart and it opened their heart. And I feel like it moved our relationship way forward because they saw me as not just their mom, but as a human being, as someone who had gone through things they had gone through that they didn't realize. They never saw that side of me until I had the guts to tell them.
And in this particular case, where you're talking about maybe sharing mistakes you made, things like that.
Yeah.
Part of that, I talked earlier about, you're kind of sending that safety, I call it the safety signal, like, hey, this is a safe place, safe relationship. Because if you're admitting to your kids, and I'm not telling you should tell your kids everything that you've done. My kids were quite old before I told them everything that I'd done, because I did a lot. But
It took a long time to tell him because there was so much.
It's a big book. But when you are sharing your mistakes with somebody and you're revealing some of your own flaws, like our kids in that case, there's a natural place for them to go, which is, Mom's not going to judge me too harshly. She's not, because sometimes, especially in a parent relationship, sometimes parents are like, you need to do as I say, blah, and the kids are thinking like, did you never make any mistakes? Were you never,
Right.
And so part of what we want to send to people in relationships is that, if you want more authentic relationships, if you want people to walk with you more closely, you have to somehow find a way to send the vibe that says, I'm not looking for an opportunity to judge you. Because, if people think you're looking for an opportunity to judge them, that's going to have the opposite effect. So, thank you for sharing that. My story about Luke, and I don't know, they're probably watching up in Wisconsin this morning. Hi, Luke and Joya. And my story about him is, it's not so much openness and vulnerability, but I just remember it's a good story. And I don't know if he remembers this, but those teenage years when I couldn't figure out how to be close to him and feel close to him, it's that dad-son teenage years thing. And so I'm like, well, what do I do? Because, when we wake up from this season of life, when he's in his 20s, I want him to remember, that I'm here and that I love him, right? So I would do this thing where, he'd just be like walking through the kitchen or something, and I would just sneak up behind him, wrap my arms around him, and say, I love you, man, and then boom, I'm gone, And that was just my way of saying, like, I want you to remember this somewhere down the road, that I love you. And even that, there was a little bit of vulnerability. That leads to another great story. So, when we were first married, I was not my mother-in-law's favorite person. How's that? And there were reasons for that. And they had to do with church and departing one kind of church and going to a different kind of church, kind of upsetting the family history and family apple cart, and loved my mother-in-law and father-in-law, wonderful people, and I miss them terribly. But we had tense years in the beginning. But, she softened up to me as the years went by, and she saw that I was a good husband to Linda, at least most of the time, and that I was a good dad to their grandchildren. What were their grandchildren? But she was, as Linda just shared, she was a little bit more of a closed person. That was just kind of what she was shaped in growing up. And I'm thinking, like, I want to tell this woman, now that things are a little better, I want her to know I love her. But I don't know how to do that with her because it's just awkward and difficult. And so I planned this whole thing because we would always go to their house for the holidays, and then at the end of the evening, we would leave, and she would walk us to the door. Actually, we'd go to leave, and then she'd say, oh, we haven't had dessert. So then we'd go have dessert, then we'd go to leave again. Some of you know that routine. And then she'd walk us to the door, and I'd go out and start the car. It's Christmas, it's cold. Go out and fire up the car and warm it up. So I planned this whole thing where I went out, I fired up the car so it would be warm. I made sure Linda and the kids were out the door first, and my mother-in-law, she just always, I think, kind of walked us to the door. And there weren't verbal expressions of affection between us, and I never called her Mom. That was just felt too, So when these guys were out the door, I just turned to her real quick, and I grabbed her, and I hugged her hard, and I said, I love you, Mom, and I was gone. Partially because I didn't want her to have to respond. I knew it was going to be awkward for her, and I didn't want to put her in a bad way. Also because I knew I would have no idea what to say next, So anyway, but sometimes people haven't yet become very aware of navigating openness. Not all of us learn that in life growing up, And so you kind of referenced this a couple of weeks ago when we introduced this series. So sometimes people are kind of like open and closed, like they open up to you and they want to pull you close, and then the next time you see them, it's like, whoo, shields up, Can you talk about a relationship that was like that?
Yes. So years ago, I had this friend who I did some ministry stuff with, and she, was a great person. She was very talented, Anyway, she seemed very together and very, I don't know how to put it, like capable,
Yeah,
a very
capable,
capable
yeah.
person, strong person. And at one point in time, after a lot of time had passed, I'd known her for quite some time. And one day she was really struggling, and I think she just couldn't hold it in anymore. And so she opened up to me and just told me everything that was going on with her. And, she was crying, and I remember, hugging her, trying to comfort her and encourage her however I could. And then I remember, going home and telling you about it, because I thought, oh my gosh, this is a breakthrough, in our relationship. I was not happy for her, what she was going through, obviously, but I thought, we're going to be better friends from now on. It was a feeling that I had inside. And so then the next time I saw her, I was thinking, it's going to be different. And it was like a door had just slammed shut. And we were completely back to square one, like no progress whatsoever. And perhaps it was embarrassing to her. She was,
right.
a lot of times people are afraid to be vulnerable. They're afraid to tell you what's really going on inside. I don't know if they're afraid that you'll look at them as less.
Yeah, they may be afraid you'll judge them for it.
Like you're weak,
less,
you're
right?
not, you should have your act together.
Right.
And I think Christians can be this way too.
Yeah. And she did always come off strong.
Yes.
I know who you're talking about. She did always come off strong.
I mean, I
So
felt that way.
She probably thought she jeopardized the strength image.
Right. And I've felt that way myself before, that as a Christian, I've been a Christian for such a long time. Shouldn't I have my act together? Shouldn't I, be handling whatever situation in a better way? And sometimes you don't want people to know that you're a mess.
Right. Well, and I think
for whatever reason.
Yeah, none of us really want other people to know we're a mess, do we? I think one way we can describe what we're talking about is this: it's the idea of letting yourself be seen by people. And most of us want more connected, more joyful relationships. But the reality is, if you won't let people see much of anything inside you, and we're going to talk in a minute about the process of that, because I'm not just saying you got that, right? Like open up everything all at once, right? So the look on your faces said that was not clear. So, but if you won't let people see you at all, those more connected, more authentic relationships they're not going to happen. And so if you are a person, you may be aware as we're having this conversation that you're a person who does that. You kind of open up and pull back and open up and pull back and open up and pull back. So in the words of Bob Newhart in a very famous comedy counseling sketch, stop it. And I'm not trying to be harsh, and I am trying to be a little bit funny, but understand that people feel that signal. Yeah. Like, I thought, no. Mm-hmm. And so it makes it difficult. So you've got to, and the key is going to be that you're going to have to address some fears probably in order to make progress with that. And so I think that's kind of a hard word to hear, but I don't know that people have thought about it a lot. 30 years ago, somebody introduced me, I don't remember who, to this idea that relationships are kind of like a ladder. They called it the ladder of relationship. And they said, and I remember, I never forgot this phrase, relationship is a ladder you climb one rung at a time. It's like you start out talking about weather and the Cubs, and then you go to like more personal information like about your kids or your job, things that are more have to do, they're not out there, they actually have to do with your life. Then you move from there to opinions, like you might feel safe enough in the relationship that now you express your opinions. Of course, these days with social media, everybody is skipping straight to rung number 3, which is probably why social media is not helping relationships, because we're skipping rungs 1 and 2, and we're going straight to 3. I got an opinion, and you need to hear it, you need to know it, But anyway, then you get to the place of opinions, and then eventually you get to that rung on the ladder where you talk about, things that have happened to you, or struggles in your life, or what you actually, not just your opinion, but what you feel about something, or maybe a tough piece of your history or some struggle. And so that you kind of climb that one rung at a time. So there are 2 important things about the ladder of relationship. The first is that if you want more authentic relationships, you can't stop with the weather and the Cubs. It just, that's where you start, but you can't stop there. The second is that if you go straight to rung number 4, when you first meet people, they will suddenly remember they have somewhere else they need to be. And we've probably all had that experience. You've probably heard people use the word...
We've probably done it.
I know I have at times. There's probably somebody sitting out here who's like, you've done that to me, Fran. But you've probably heard people use that word like oversharing, or saying that somebody's an oversharer. Have you ever known an oversharer? Other than me?
My eyes just got really big in case you guys didn't see that. Absolutely. Yeah. You just want to go like that.
And
yeah.
why do you think that some people do that? There's a drive to it a lot of times. Like you just meet somebody, and I remember a woman who was in our church in the early days, and I actually can't really tell the story of what she overshared about because I just don't think it would be appropriate. It wasn't sexual or anything, but it was just things that you don't tell somebody when you first meet them. And I still remember this moment where she sat with somebody or stood with somebody after church who was like there for the first time.
And you thought, oh no.
And she said all these things, and I could just see the look on the husband's face was like, honey, that Baptist church last week wasn't too bad, was it? We could go back there, But what do you think is that there is a drive to that makes people say like, I got to open it all up right now?
Well, it could be a lot of things. It could be how they were raised. It can be they want attention. It can be they're lonely and they're trying desperately to, find a friend, but they don't realize that they're skipping to rung 4. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be a lot of different things. And just in the interest of time, I guess where we would leave this is just to say, recognize that relationship, even though you want to get to a place with openness, and that's of openness with people, and that's going to be varying degrees, right? Different degrees of openness with different people. That's appropriate. But you still have to climb the relationship in the right way, because if you don't, you will freak people out. And you will short-circuit the process of having those kind of relationships. So, okay, let's shift gears for a minute, because I want to talk about vulnerability in the moments that we are angry with each other as human beings. I know that no one here has ever been angry really angry with another person, right? But I'm talking about in a marriage or a friendship, or it could be with a sibling. Most of the time, when we get angry, when two people are in a situation where they're angry with each other, they get less vulnerable, not more, right? The shields go up, the guns come out, so metaphorically speaking, we hope. And so all vulnerability goes out the window in those moments. And what happens is that then at that point, and I see it with married couples all the time, like there's no more talking at that point. But you know the thing that you and I have talked about for years and years, which was taught to us by Christian psychologist Larry Crabb, that almost all anger is fear. What's the rest?
In disguise.
You get angry because you're afraid of the direction something is going, or you're afraid that something that needs to happen is not going to happen, or you're afraid that something you really don't want to have happen in the relationship or in life is about to happen. Yeah. And so you are afraid. But usually when we're angry, we don't get really angry and then go, wow, I'm suddenly feeling really afraid right at this moment. We identify most strongly with the primary emotion of anger in those moments. But you and I had an interesting experience in our relationship, a harrowing experience in our relationship that was sort of a lesson in this for both of us, because things have been very different since. And some of you know some of this story, but we just celebrated our 40th anniversary because we got married when we were 5. And yeah. So we just celebrated our 40th anniversary, and the year that we were married 25 years, it didn't have anything to do with our anniversary, but the year we were married 25 years was the toughest year in our marriage. And there were a lot of contributing factors.
Well, it wasn't the toughest year in our marriage. It was the toughest year relationally in our marriage.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Not circumstances,
Right.
with each other.
Exactly.
It was the toughest
Yeah.
year with each other. And I don't have time to tell you the whole story, but basically, Linda had a lot going on in her corner of the world with parents who were ill and having a lot of needs, and she felt that I was not,
You weren't present.
I wasn't present. I wasn't in the game, I wasn't present enough to her in the emotions of that, and I wasn't present enough to the needs of her parents. And we had been through a really tough time as a church. It was after we kind of shifted some things about the way we worshiped, and we started working on the east side of Joliet, and we started traipsing around the southern peninsula of Haiti to feed people and build schools and stuff. And it was kind of an exhilarating time of ministry, but a bunch of people had left the church, and I was under a lot of criticism. And I felt that she was not noticing the stress I was under of both the criticism and the challenges of, like, going to Haiti and, trying to learn how in the world, right, Marnie? How do you work in a third world culture, right? All these things we've had to learn, right? And so we basically went like this, year 25. We just grew apart. We basically, in our hearts, without saying it, we're looking at each other and saying, you are not here for me. You don't understand. You're not helping me at all with what I'm going through. And I could feel it. I don't know what you felt. I don't know if we've ever talked about that, like what you felt during that year. How I could feel the distance. I could feel this chasm growing. And make a long story short, we finally one day had a big argument. And it wasn't about all of that. It was about something else. And in the middle of the argument, I did a very foolish thing. I said to her, well, as long as we're talking, maybe it's time to put everything on the table. And she looked at me and she said, are you sure you're ready for that? And I was like, because I thought, you always think when you're the mad one, you always think you're the one who's got the goods on the other person, right? And all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, she has grievances? I thought I had all the grievances. I was pretty
Airing
sure.
of the grievances.
And I'm not going to lie to you, Linda and I are not screamers, yellers, and throwers, if you know what I mean by that as far as marriage goes. We yelled. We were mad. We raised our voices. And then, because our son was home, he worked nights and slept during the day because he was home in the basement, she said, we are not doing this here. And we got in the car and we took a several hours long drive. And we yelled some more.
And then we cried.
And then we cried. And somehow what happened, and I just think it was a huge lesson for us, is we got vulnerable. We moved somehow, by God's grace, from anger to the vulnerability of the real thing that was under that anger, which was fear. And when we confessed our fears and the other person didn't just pummel us more, in that environment, it became safe to confess our flaws. And I was able to say to her, I am sorry, through lots of tears, that I have not been paying attention to what you're going through and what your parents are going through. And she was able to say, I am sorry that I have not been paying attention to the stress that's killing you, trying to, lead this church and forge a new ministry and all these kind of things. What happens when you get vulnerable is in the midst of that mess is that you're able to say to each other, I still want to be in the pool with you. I still want to jump in that pool with you. Can we still do that? Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, and this is maybe a sidetrack, but just to speak to that a little bit, in order for that to make progress in your relationship, there also has to be forgiveness. Because I specifically remember
we're going to get to forgiveness in this series.
Yeah. I specifically remember after that happened, like for months, there were times where I would almost have like a flashback in my head of that conversation and things that were said that were hurtful to me. Maybe you felt the same thing from me.
Tried to block it out of my mind.
Right, but
I really don't remember a lot of the details
Yeah.
of that conversation. I
Yeah.
just know what happened.
yeah. No, I agree. But anyway, I would think of those things and I would start to feel myself getting mad again. And I would realize I should be mad. I deserve to be mad. I can't believe he did that or said that or whatever.
Do you want to be mad about those things again?
No.
Okay.
No, that's my point. My point is when I recognized that, I thought, yes, you could be mad and he could be mad, but we're not going to move forward if we just hold on to that anger and say, oh, I deserve to be angry. It's like this self-righteousness or something. And I had to make a concerted effort to let it go. And I think that's something in relationship. If we want to grow stronger in relationship, we have to learn when to let it go.
It reminds me of something else that you and I learned from either Larry Crabb or Dan Allender back when we were reading those guys' books. We are both victims and perpetrators.
Absolutely.
And when you want to be angry about how you've been victimized, sometimes what allows you to be even more angry is you tell yourself you've never been a perpetrator. You've never been the one doing the hurting. And so just remember, no. We should just say there's an Achilles heel to vulnerability. And some of you have probably already been sitting there thinking about it. And the Achilles heel is that openness won't always be reciprocated. You may have a relationship, a friendship, could even be a romantic relationship or a marriage where you try to be that person that creates the openness, creates the safety, draw the other person out, and they just don't reciprocate. And that's real. And that's life because we don't control other human beings. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't. We have to decide if this is the way we want to live and who we want to become, though, in relationships. We can't always control the outcome. And what I've learned about that is that that's the reason that my ultimate source of life has to be something and someone bigger than even all my human relationships. I don't ask Linda to fill my cup all the way because she can't do it. And you can't do it for your husband, and you can't do it for your wife, and you can't do it for your best friend. And someday as your kids grow up, you won't be able to do it for your kids. We have to find the life of God. We have to find the bigger things and the deeper joys. Otherwise, what happens is when someone doesn't reciprocate, we'll move into, you said you can't demand vulnerability. We'll move into trying to demand openness and vulnerability, something they probably can't even give us, or certainly won't give us in that moment. So do you think this is a weird question? Do you think that we are open people? Everybody thinks they are, right? It's like that line in, you ever see When Harry Met Sally? There's this great line Linda and I always talk about where she says, everybody thinks they have good taste, but everybody can't possibly have good taste. And if you said to people, do you think you're open? Everybody would be like, oh yeah, I'm open, But do you think we're open people? It's hard to be objective about yourself.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that can be challenging in our jobs. Like, it's hard. You can't be vulnerable with your entire church all the time, So I think it can be challenging
or
to
not
some
to a
degree.
certain
I don't
degree.
know. Yeah.
Right. And that's another good quick thing to say here is just this. There are things, when we talk about openness and vulnerability, there are a few things in you. Your deepest struggles, your toughest secrets. Don't sit there and tell me, I've never had a secret in my life, Your deepest struggles, your toughest secrets, those you reserve for your most trusted people. I've learned that in life. And that's not an argument for being a closed person. It's just saying that what you share with people needs to be in proportion to being able to trust them with your heart. Because I don't want people to go out of here and say, Fran said we should go out and tell everybody all our deepest struggles and toughest secrets. Absolutely not. So I just want to end with a verse from one of Paul's letters that I love. A simple verse in 2 Corinthians 4:7, where Paul says, he's talking about the treasure of what we've been given in the love of God in Christ. And he says, "But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be shown to be of God and not from us." And what I want to tell you guys is, it's okay to just be, earthen vessels, that's like jars of clay. Like, we're just a bunch of regular clay pots. And we have our flaws, and we have our shortcomings, and it's okay to be a regular clay pot, because we're all works in progress, A lot of what keeps us from being open, we sang about it earlier, is our sense of shame. But Jesus has borne our shame at the cross. And he loves us in spite of our flaws and our foibles. And so it's okay to be a work in progress. If I share something with you at some point, and you say, and you hold that against me, or whatever, maybe I trust you with something, and then it turns out, maybe you bring that back on me somehow. You won't have nearly as much success in shaming me as you would have 20 or 30 years ago. Because I freely admit at this point in my journey, I'm a flawed man. I'm a work in progress. I'm not who I used to be, and I'm not yet who I'm going to be. And so let God help you get over your shame, because as the Lord helps you get over your shame, that will free you up then to be who you are with people. You won't feel, this is a good way to put it, you won't feel such a need to hide and pretend with people. Make sense? Father, how you love us. Unbelievably. The messes that we sometimes are, and the messes we sometimes make, and the fears that we carry around, and the silly ways we tell ourselves to live and relate. But you love us, and in your steadfast love, our hearts are made free. We're talking about being safe people this morning, Lord. You're the safest person in the universe. And I'm so grateful for that, because it's allowed me to open up. It's allowed me to get past a whole bunch of shame. It's allowed me to see with your eyes. And so, Lord, help us to take this journey. It is a journey to becoming people who can open ourselves to others. But help us realize, Lord, that if we can grow into people who can do that in a healthy way, it's not just better for us and our relationships. It becomes a vehicle by which we invite other people into your grace. And your grace is a great, big, beautiful ocean.